Welcome back to the class. We are in the 12th week, that is the last week of the course. And in the last two sessions, you had a discussion by Dayal Paliri, who is a PhD student in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, about recent debates on decoloniality. And he has discussed you with a lot of arguments and debates about the recent discussions on the necessity to decolonize social sciences and the kind of options and the kind of alternatives that are being explored by many sociologists in India or in many of these uh, ex-colonial societies. So in this class as well as in the next session, I'm going to discuss some of the more recent interventions about the changing nature of social sciences and sociology in the light of globalization. And I hope you remember I had made a very brief remark about globalization in the very uh, first class, very first session of this whole course, uh, when I was trying to trace the origin and development of sociology from its early period of modernity to the most recent times. The period of globalization, for maybe in India, maybe for the last 30 years, has really presented a very, very unique challenge to the discipline, the way in which it is being visualized, it is understood, and it is being practiced. So globalization as a phenomenon, as a comprehensive social transformation that is happening across the globe, has posed significant challenges to almost everything. As you know that we live in a very, very rapidly changing society. We live in a very, very completely different society. So there is a global integration of various kinds, and there have been very, very fascinating theorizations on globalization. And I have offered another NPTEL course on globalization, titled Globalization Theoretical Perspectives. So in that course, I deal with those globalization theories in detail. But in this class, as well as in the next one, I'm going to look at two essays and two important people. One is Ulrich Beck, a German sociologist, and the other one is Manuel Castells, another very prominent sociologist. And what these scholars have said about the impact of globalization on social sciences in general and that of sociology in particular. So this will open up some of the most recent debates about the kind of arguments and concerns about changing nature of social sciences and sociology in a globalizing world. So for the first essay, I am taking this essay titled "The Cosmopolitan State: Redefining Power in the Global Age." So this essay, written by Ulrich Beck, titled "The Cosmopolitan State: Redefining Power in Global Age," is basically a lengthy essay about the changing nature of nation state. And it's a very fascinating essay in itself, where he talks about the transformation of nation state in the era of globalization. As nation state was a product of modernity, and the form of nation state and nation state as an institution emerged along with modernity, and that continues to be the most important ways in which nations are organized across the globe. And that is how the lives of everybody is organized under the auspices of nation state. And this essay is a very fascinating analysis about the transformation of that. It's a theoretical essay on that, and I'm not going to discuss this entire essay. It's a very lengthy essay, but the first part of this particular essay, Ulrich Beck talks about the transformations of social sciences. Okay, why that social sciences needs to be more sensitive to the kind of a changing global society, and that is a part which I'm talking about, so that why this particular section is included. There is very interesting discussion about a change from methodological nationalism to methodological cosmopolitanism, urging all social science practitioners, including sociologists, to be open to the kind of changing transformations in society, not to confine their perspective within the national boundaries, because the globalization has become a reality, and what is national is no longer confined within the geographic boundaries of the nation, but it is been heavily impacted by transnational or global flows and then processes. So that is an argument, and I'm using this essay, and we will go through this essay briefly. It's a first part. So what does globalization mean in the context of social sciences? What does globalization mean? I define globalization as a reflexive rather than a linear process, taking the global and the local, or the universal and the particular, not as opposite but as combined and mutually implicit principles. These processes are historically variable and multidimensional, and this is a very important definition, because at least in the beginning there was a tendency to equate globalization with Americanization, or equate globalization with westernization. Okay, so to the argument that everything that is local is getting transformed after the influence of the West, or it's going to be nothing but the West is taking over the rest of the world. But the more recent theorization, more nuanced theorization argue that the local and the global coexist, but there is a very interesting kind of negotiation and dialectical process between the local and the global. So he defines globalization as a reflexive rather than a linear process. It's not a linear process, but it is a reflective process where certain things undergo rapid transformation on the basis of how it interacts with other thing, and meantime it also influences the kind of a spiraling of each other. Not as opposite but as combined and mutually implicit principles. Yeah, their application goes further than mere interconnectedness, changing the relation between nation states and nation state societies. Yeah, rather they alter the quality of social and political within nation state societies. Here I refer to the internal globalization or even cosmopolitanization of nation state societies from within. So his argument is that the nation state is not going to wither away. Nation state is not going to kind of is not going to disappear or to become irrelevant. But what is happening within the nation state is undergoing a significant qualitative change. There is even a cosmopolitanization of a nation state societies from within. Okay, so the nation state is no longer kind of cut off from the rest of the society, or the society within the nation state is no longer cut off from the rest of the world, whereas and the society within a nation state is getting kind of internal globalization or even a kind of a process of cosmopolitanization. But what does internal globalization or cosmopolitanization from within mean? One can answer this question by referring to the theory of reflexive modernization. He has Beck and Giddens and Lash. They have a very interesting essay on reflexive modernization, where they tend to disagree with the theorization of postmodernism. Okay, because you know that there is this after 1980s there is a huge theoretical advancement in the name of postmodernism, which to a large extent rejected outrightly many of the principles of or premises of modernity. But most of the sociologists, including Castells and Ulrich Beck and Giddens, are not ready to hop on this postmodernist bandwagon. Rather, they argue that what is happening after 1980s is a kind of a radicalized modernity, or what they call it as a reflexive modernity. Okay? The first modernity has kind of radicalized itself, and Beck calls it as a reflexive modernity. One central operational thesis, basic indicator of reflexive modernization is the pluralization of borders. Okay, this is supposed to be true for so fundamental dualisms like the borders between nature and culture. So the one of the important arguments about reflexive modernization is that the binaries are becoming less and less rigid. There's a pluralization of borders, the kind of a fundamental dualisms like borders between nature and culture, nature and society, or nature and culture, society and unawareness, subject and object, peace and war, life and death, we and other are becoming more and more complicated. If one focuses on globalization from within, the pluralization of borders means the pluralization of nation state borders, or the implosion of the dualisms between the national and the international. How far is there a multitude of non-identical borders emerging from which theme and dimensions and with what effects? For example, he's talking about economic, the asymmetry between mobility of capital and the labor migration; cultural, the transnational communication flows and lifestyles; private and public cross-border networks, decision-making structures, number of types of transnational marriages and births; political, state, the post-national citizenship, these are all some of the most recent advancements. Okay, for example, the post-national citizenship. There are theories about a kind of an entirely new generation of people with cosmopolitan outlook, cosmopolitan lifestyle, who are globe trotters, who do not live in a particular place for long, who are frequent travelers, who do not identify themselves with any particular motherland or native place or anything. So a host of new kind of transformations, including global risk and technology and internet and other things, have come to define the nature of the contemporary society. So in terms of methodological nationalism, this is a very important term. In terms of methodological nationalism, which has so far been dominant in the social sciences, these borders coincide. Deviations are considered exceptions. The axiom of the congruity of borders. So what does it mean? In the case of methodological nationalism, when you take nation state as the border of your society, for example, if you are studying Indian society, then naturally it is assumed that you are talking about Indian society as an entity that is well within the boundaries of Indian nation state. If you're talking about Indian economy, you understand this is an entity that is very much within the boundaries of Indian territory or Indian nation state. And sociology and economics is supposed to study the Indian society and Indian economy as if they are kind of enclosed. Okay, they are kind of enclosed within the boundaries, and that particular scenario is changing according to Ulrich Beck. Now, in terms of methodological cosmopolitanism, these borders diverge. So earlier, if you were to talk about citizenship, or if you talk about culture or society or economy, it was supposedly from within this kind of particular border. But at the time of methodological cosmopolitanism, these borders diverge. Internal globalization thus stands for dissonance in the drawing of borderlines, the axiom of the incongruity of borders. In other words, borders are no longer predetermined. They can be chosen and interpreted, but simultaneously also they have been redrawn and legitimated anew. There is both an increase in plausible ways of drawing new borders and a growing tendency to question existing borders. So he's talking about the recent the process of globalization are how they are bringing in a lot more complexity in terms of our understanding about what is inside, what is outside, what are the kind of a borders, and what are the kind of a dualisms and the binaries that we used to have taken for granted. When cultural, political, and economic and legal borders are no longer congruent, contradictions open up between the various principles of exclusion. See, this is again interesting topic, because it's almost similar to what Arjuna Padure has argued when he theorized globalization as a increasing disjuncture between various kind of scapes, between ethnoscape, financescapes, then mediascape and ideascape. This is exactly what it means. Okay, it's no longer happening within the boundaries of a nation state, but rather there is increasing disjuncture. When the cultural, political, economic, and legal borders are no longer congruent, you may have a political map of India, representing its political boundaries, its geographical boundaries, but these geographical boundaries are less significant, and with a kind of a cultural boundary, or with a kind of an economic boundary or legal boundary. A legal boundary, it need not congruent with the political or the geographical boundary. A multinational company who is working in India need not go by the kind of legal system within the country itself, or the cultural aspects, the kind of media that you consume, the kind of food that you consume, the kind of entertainment that you buy need not be something that is specific to the culture, to the geographic or to the physical boundaries of the place in which you live. That is a kind of an argument about the non-congruence of the axiom of incongruity of borders. Globalization, understood as pluralization of borders, produces, in other words, a legitimation crisis of national morality of exclusion. This emerges under two conditions. Firstly, insofar as the national and social and political problems context becomes transnational and are recognized as such, demanding transnational solutions in turn. So another very important point often spoken about is that in most of the most of the problems that humanity is facing in a globalized era are transnational, okay, and which are much beyond the capacity of a single nation state to address and resolve. Whether it is a case of international terrorism, or the case of say global warming, or pollution, or economic recessions, all these things have become much more transnational in its character and are much beyond the capacity of individual state. Secondly, demanding transnational solutions in turn. Secondly, insofar as national and ethnic ties are pluralized, overlap and are de-essentialized within one and the same lived context. Insofar as national and ethnic ties are pluralized, okay, a particular nationality, people of a particular nationality no longer live within the geographic boundary. Okay, that is the whole studies about diaspora. Now, the kind of presence of Indians in USA, or Indians in the UK, and that the current Prime Minister of UK is of an Indian origin. So this is going to be the situation in the coming days as well. So Indians will be there everywhere, Pakistanis will be there everywhere, or Chinese will be there everywhere, or Americans will be there everywhere, and that particular situation creates a lot more complexities, and it is no longer a situation where a particular nationality live within the boundaries of that particular nation state. At this point, questions as to the distribution of membership open up. On which principles are the internal hierarchies between minorities, the majority, and migrants of communities or states based? In addition, questions as to the distribution of civil rights, who and or which principle decide who enjoys civil rights. So these are all the definitions of or the kind of questions that Ulrich Beck argues will begin to influence every society, and of course that includes India as well. Maybe India has not globalized to that extent that you may not find too many foreign people coming and then settling down here, but that is not the situation elsewhere. How many the whole question about where do you live, how many foreigners live in different societies, how many places that they have been living, all these kind of questions. Yeah, so what he essentially talks in this particular section is that the globalization has come and it will continue to be a major force to reckon with. Okay, people will move across the globe. There is a kind of a large scale transnational migration, transnational movement of people in the form of refugees, in the form of workers, in the form of visitors, in the form of students will travel to across the places. So that will create quite a lot of challenges to every society. Now, if that is the case, what are the kind of implications of such a scenario to social sciences is what he is actually asking, and that is what we are also interested in. The question of a cosmopolitan social science. So his argument, or rather kind of a consensual argument, is that modern social sciences are preoccupied with the nation states. As I mentioned earlier, Indian sociology was concerned with the Indian society as seen as people living within the national boundaries, and there was hardly any attention paid to the kind of a large transnational influences and transnational flows. In the understanding of social sciences, society generally stands for its plural societies. This, however, implies that there are as many societies as nation states. The state is the creator, controller, and guarantor of society. That is a kind of a conventional understanding that we had. When you talk about Indian society, we often equate it with the Indian state, and Indian seen as Indian state having a kind of a complete control over the Indian society. Societies are thought as containers which emerge and are sustained within state sphere of influence. This container theory of nation-state societies, which define and limit societies territorially, is deeply ingrained in the self-perception of sociology. Okay, the same point that we have been talking about. In its categories and concepts, one could say in the sociological imagination, the nation-state gaze has become sociology's limit of perception. In this context, it is possible to speak of a methodological nationalism, meaning explicit and implicit assumption that nation-state is the container of social processes, and that the nation provides the core order for the analysis of social, economic, and political processes. It is exactly this nation state a priori of the social sciences which is becoming fundamentally questionable in the course of the pluralization of borders. Okay, the same point that we discussed, the conventional understanding that the geographical boundary of a nation state, it contains almost every processes that happen here, whether it is cultural, economic, social, or political, or anything. And that situation is no longer tenable because there is a pluralization of border happening, and the kind of a physical boundary or the geographical boundary or even the political boundary is becoming less and less significant. We thus have to query, for example, the assumed correspondence between national territory and the national, as well as the related implication that the nation and the non-national are two logically mutually exclusive conditions. In fact, however, this previously constitutive distinction collapses as a result of globalization process. The same point that we mentioned. What occurs within the territory of sovereign state is not necessarily to be read as a national process. Okay, so what happens within this boundary need not be seen as a national process. Rather, it can be heavily influenced by the kind of a transnational processes. What appears to be as labeled as or even understood as national, big companies, flows and capital and culture can be localized outside national territories. Example, in another country or in the digital space. The localization of the global or non-national within national territories and the national outside the national territory undermine the key differentiation of the national and the non-national as being logically and empirically mutually exclusive conditions, which lies at the heart of so many methods or conceptual frameworks of the social science. So this is the core of the argument. Okay, so you can have a company here maybe, but owned by somebody from a particular country, but the whole process of production might happen somewhere else. Okay, or they can even shift that, or the whole process might happen in the digital world even with very limited physical presence. So what is national and what is transnational, what is happening within the country and what is happening outside the country appear to be more complicated. The localization of the global or the non-national within national territories. Okay, the localization of the global within the national territories and of the national outside national territories. Okay, the other multinational companies coming and then setting up stores and then activities here in a particular nation, as well as the people from within the nation going out and then setting up other places. All these things are becoming extremely commonplace in a globalized era. A widespread and certainly justified worry within the empirically oriented social science is that an inclusion of globalization phenomenon and questions create the dangers of a relapse of social sciences into a metaphysics. That means it might lose its emphasis on the kind of empiricism. An empirical social science of globalization is not in sight and may even be impossible. Okay, because empiricism usually works at a much lower level, and that may not be possible in the case of a globalized society. The fear that globalization will lead to a revival of theoretical sociological theory without an empirical base has been qualified by numerous studies, but cannot be dismissed so easily in view of the over theoretical nature of this debate. The conceptual and methodological study of cosmopolitan sociology of the internal globalization of the nation-state societies should thus have the goal of creating a cosmopolitan index. This should include the systematic treatment of questions such as the following. Yeah. So, for example, he gives this example. Why not sociology take up a question of preparing a cosmopolitan index? Okay. So, for example, looking into, of course, all these studies by Beck and Castles, all these are heavily from the experience of the European societies, which are far more globalized than a society like India. But the concerns and debates about sociology remain valid. How many people in Germany, Great Britain, France, etc. marry foreigners? Of which nationality? How many children grow up in a binational context? How many languages are spoken? What do people most identify with? The place they live, local identity, the nation, national identity, or with the fate of the world as a whole, cosmopolitan identity. So So he's asking a series of questions basically to construct a cosmopolitan index. Okay, because this was unthinkable or this was unnecessary sometime back in most of the societies, because people who live in a particular nation state would be of that particular nation, would be getting married to those particular people, people from the same group, speaking the same language, consuming the kind of the cultural products that are produced within that. But that is no longer the case. So he's giving the example of producing a cosmopolitan index for that matter. Now, similar data ought to be taken from the areas of tourism and travel in general. Great care has to be taken, however, not to oversimplify the interpretation of such indicators or variables as a proof of change of consciousness or behavior pointing towards a cosmopolitan society. Rather, yeah. Okay, so he's giving kind of examples about how this kind of a, for example, this whole idea about cosmopolitan index is important, and why that every nation is now confronted with this question of having more and more people of different nationalities coming into those societies and living, and what kind of issues and what kind of problems that this particular situation can arise. It is, however, extremely difficult to break up forms of observation and conceptual systems centered on nation state, even when they are confronted with the problems of empirical validity and logical inconsistency. What is required, therefore, is an epistemological break. The predominant tools and methods of analysis are simply not adequate to address the roots of the new power game, the drama of transnational border pluralizations and conflicts, and to uncover and decode them at the empirical theoretical level. So he says that globalization really necessitates a kind of a radical transformation of the ontological and epistemological basis of social science. Okay, because social science has a particular history, especially sociology has a particular history, which about originating in the 19th and 20th century in Europe, and under particular context, and that context provided its epistemological anchorage to this particular discipline. And Beck would argue, or even Manuel Castells would argue, that the time has come to revise this kind of epistemological base. Ultimately, the discourse of globalization casts doubts on the relation between our knowledge of the world on one hand and social structure on the other. Social structures, or social reality and dynamics, to put it more carefully, are being transnationalized. An appropriate epistemological change of perception corresponding to this ontological transformation is required. That is, from a methodological nationalism to a methodological cosmopolitanism. So he says that the very ontology of what is social, okay, has undergone change, and in a globalized society presents a very different understanding of what is social. And if the ontology has changed, the ontology of what is social has changed, then definitely it requires a revised understanding of a social science whose epistemology has been changed accordingly. This in turn necessitates a new differentiation of social and political analysis between the levels of appearance. National phenomena are possibly circularly misinterpreted in the nation state frameworks of analysis, and at the level of essence, that is, they have to be analyzed and theoretically explained as transnational phenomenon and dynamics in a cosmopolitan framework. Use of the nation state paradigm can thus be or become very illusionary or mistaken, leading us to believe that we are observing national phenomena when in fact we are dealing with transnational processes or processes entailing a new ambiguity. Transnational dynamics are refracted in persisting nation state institutions and forms of consciousness. Very important argument. Okay, many things that we tend to consider and then understand as national phenomena need not be national phenomena, but are heavily influenced by transnational processes. And a host of examples. One of the examples could be the recent or the current discourses about sexuality. Okay, the current discourses about sexuality, multiple sexual orientations, and multiple sexual identities. These are all part of a much larger transnational discourse, which is taking a very different and concrete and localized forms and articulations in the Indian context. Results that are thus identified as national phenomena and strategies, even in the context of standard international comparative studies, should in fact be identified under conditions of border pluralization as consequence of mobile transnational capital, cultures, and information flows, technologically determined changes in the human images, risks, and transnational inequalities, etc. Okay? The paradigm shift is founded on and signaled by dualism characterized by the opposing terms of international and transnational. So he's making a distinction between international and transnational. So he says international is no longer sufficient because international represents that you're talking about a multiplicity of nation states. When you're talking about an international process, you give still predominance to the nation state, whereas a transnational gives more importance to the process rather than the national, the significance of the national. So there's a shift when you talk about from international to transnational. Okay, when in an international scenario, nation states are still important, and you see nation state playing an important role in making certain things kind of international. Whereas a transnational, the significance and centrality of nation state has come down very, very significantly. So that is what is being explained here. The opposing thesis of transnationality blows open this entire framework of meanings from the inside. Against the background of the transnational, it suddenly emerges that the national and international cannot be clearly differentiated, nor can they serve to separate homogeneous entities from one another. National realms are denationalized so that the national is no longer national and international no longer international. In the course of transnationalization, the container of power that is the nation state is simultaneously broken open from the inside and outside, and a new view is established. A new perspective of space and time, new coordinates of social and political, as already mentioned. The world is designed anew, justifying a new epochal term, that of the second age of modernity. So, gives a lot of examples. The same goes for the conflicts of gender, class, ethnicity, homosexuality, which though they have emerged from the national realm, have long left it behind and in the reality overlap and interconnect at the transnational. The same point that we discussed. Globalization taken to its conclusion. To summarize the argument thus far, means that the social sciences must be founded anew as a science of transnational reality. Conceptually, theoretically, methodologically, and also organizationally. This is the core argument. Social science must be realized, or it must be reconceptualized, reimagined as a science of transnational reality. The key concepts of modern society, like household, family, class, democracy, power, state, economy, public sphere, politics, etc., must be removed from their fixed setting in the methodological nationalism. So all these terms which we used to anchor within the nation state needs to be removed from that and then seen in a transnational picture. They must be redefined or rethought in the framework of the methodological cosmopolitanism. This has to be done elsewhere. So he's not going into the elaborate thing, but here there's a table is given where he makes a very useful distinction between methodological nationalism and methodological cosmopolitanism. For example, borders in the methodological nationalism, that is in the conventional sense of social science, it's a congruency of borders. The national differentiation inside and outside dominates all areas. Political membership is predetermined and then exclusive. You have to be born in a particular nation to get the nationality. Whereas methodological cosmopolitanism, it's very different. Borders have continually to be redrawn and justified. Elective, plural, political membership. Then similarly, there's economy, state politics, class, social inequalities, ethnicity, culture, everything. So ethics and globalization. So this particular table is something very useful to understand the different frameworks used in the era in the time of methodological nationalism and methodological cosmopolitanism. So why this part of the essay, maybe the remaining part of the essay, Beck talks about more specifically about the cosmopolitan state, which I'm not going to discuss because that's a different topic. But anybody is interested to understand what is Ulrich Beck's arguments about the transformation happening to nation state in the era of globalization, this is a very, very important essay. He talks about transformation in the autonomy and sovereignty of nation state and how that was different in the first modernity. Very, very fascinating essay. But this particular the section that we discussed so far is, I think, is kind of sufficient enough to give you a broad understanding about the larger debate within globalization studies about the need to reorient social sciences, basically to understand the global character of our contemporary society. Okay, so the transnationality has become the most prominent term. Transnationality has become the buzzword, and social sciences, including sociology, has to reinvent themselves to comprehend this new reality, and that is what this argument talks about. So, as I mentioned, the reason why I included it, because it's an essay or part of an essay that reflects the kind of a influence of globalization studies on the kind of a nature of disciplinary boundaries, disciplinary definitions, and its frameworks. So I'll end the class here, and we will take up one more essay in the coming class, that is by another important sociologist, Manuel Castells. See you then. Thank you.